Montana Territory, 1875. Prairie dust swirled across the wooden platform of Pine Creek Station as Preston Xavier wiped his brow, squinting into the afternoon sun. At 25, Preston had already carved a respectable ranch from Montana's unforgiving landscape, but something hollow echoed in his achievements. The two-story farmhouse stood mostly empty, its rooms waiting for voices that never came. "Train's coming in, press," called the station master, breaking through Preston's thoughts. Preston adjusted his tan Stetson, smoothing down his cotton shirt and brushing dust from his denims. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, fidgeted with the bolo tie he rarely wore. The locomotive's whistle pierced the air, and his stomach tightened with a familiar dread. "A wife won't fix what's broken in you," he muttered to himself, repeating the thought that had plagued him since mailing that letter 3 months ago. The frontier breaks people. Better to face it alone than watch someone you care about suffer. Preston had built his life around this belief, that the Montana Territory was too harsh for tender feelings, that the isolation and danger would crush anyone not born to it. His parents' devastating end during his 16th year had cemented this truth. His father shot dead in a land dispute, his mother following months later, her spirit crushed by grief and frontier hardship. Yet here he stood, waiting for a bride. The locomotive hissed to a stop, belching steam across the platform. Preston's throat tightened as passengers began to disembark. He clutched the small photograph in his pocket, the only image he had of Miss Julia Anderson, 21 years old, from Boston, Massachusetts. Her letters had been proper and measured, revealing little of her true nature beyond a desperate need to escape whatever life had offered her in the East. Preston spotted her immediately. She stood hesitantly at the train steps, gripping a small valise with white-knuckled hands. Her pale blue traveling dress, though wrinkled from the journey, spoke of Eastern refinement. Golden blonde hair escaped her bonnet in wisps, framing a heart-shaped face that matched the photograph, though the image hadn't captured the striking blue of her eyes now wide with unmistakable fear as they darted across the dusty frontier town. She stepped onto the platform, her gaze sweeping the small crowd until it locked with Preston's. Something in her expression, vulnerability mixed with determination, struck him like a physical blow. He'd expected a simple transaction, companionship and children in exchange for security and protection. But the raw emotion in Julia Anderson's face complicated everything. Preston crossed the platform in long strides, removing his hat as he approached. "Miss Anderson?" His voice came out gentler than intended. She nodded, her chin lifting slightly despite the trembling visible in her shoulders. "Mr. Xavier?" "Yes, ma'am." He gestured awkwardly to take her bag. "Welcome to Pine Creek." As she surrendered the valise, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a yellowing bruise circling her wrist. She quickly tugged the fabric down, but Preston had already seen it. Her eyes, those cornflower blue eyes, filled with a different kind of fear, the fear of discovery. "The journey was long," she said, her Boston accent softening the words. "I hope I haven't disappointed you with my appearance." Preston's planned formal greeting dissolved. Instead, he said quietly, "There's nothing disappointing about you, Miss Anderson." A train whistle blew, making her flinch. The station bustled around them with travelers and freight, a reminder of how exposed they were. Julia glanced nervously at a group of rough-looking men eyeing her from the saloon entrance across the street. Preston noticed her discomfort and instinctively stepped between her and their stares. "My wagon's just over yonder," he said. "We've got about an hour's ride to the ranch." As they walked toward his wagon, Julia stumbled slightly. Preston caught her elbow to steady her, and she winced, pulling away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, mortification coloring her cheeks. "I'm just tired." In that moment, understanding dawned on Preston. Whatever she was running from in Boston, it had left more than the bruise on her wrist. The realization sparked something protective in him that contradicted his firmly held belief that emotional attachments were dangerous out here. He helped her onto the wagon seat and climbed up beside her. Before taking the reins, he turned to her, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Anderson, Julia, I don't know what brought you all this way, and you don't have to tell me. But I want you to know something." He met her fearful gaze directly. "Darlin, I'll keep you safe. That's a promise." The words surprised them both. Julia's eyes widened, searching his face for insincerity and finding none. For the first time, the fear in her expression softened just slightly, replaced by cautious hope. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier," she replied softly. "Preston," he corrected, picking up the reins. "I reckon if we're to be married, you might as well use my Christian name." As the wagon pulled away from town, neither of them noticed the man who had disembarked from the same train, watching them with calculating eyes before stepping into the saloon. Preston's ranch sprawled across a verdant valley cradled by rolling hills. The main house stood proudly, with a barn, stables, and bunkhouse forming a protective semicircle. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and a creek wound through the property like a silver ribbon. Julia's face brightened at the sight. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Your letters didn't do it justice." Preston felt an unexpected swell of pride. "Been working this land 7 years now. Started with nothing but 20 acres and 3 cows. He gestured toward the mountains. "Now I've got 800 acres and over 200 head of cattle." He helped her down from the wagon, careful not to touch her where she might be injured. As they approached the house, his foreman, Walter Dunn, emerged from the barn. "Miss Anderson, this is Walt. He helps me run things around here." Walt, a weathered man in his 50s, tipped his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, good to finally meet you. Boss has been cleaning and fussing for weeks." Preston felt heat rise to his face. "That'll do, Walt." Julia smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Dunn." Walt winked at her. "You too, miss. You need anything at all, you just holler." Inside the house, Preston showed Julia to the bedroom he'd prepared for her. "I'll be sleeping in the spare room down the hall until," he cleared his throat, "until after the wedding. If you still want to go through with it, that is." Julia set her valise down, her fingers tracing the patchwork quilt on the bed. "The wedding," she echoed quietly. "When would that be?" "Preacher comes through town every other Sunday. That's 4 days from now." Preston leaned against the doorframe, keeping his distance. "But Julia, I want to be clear about something. That letter you answered, I was looking for a wife, yes. But I won't hold you to anything. If you decide this isn't what you want, I'll see you safely back to Boston or wherever else you might want to go." Her expression clouded. "I can't go back to Boston." "Then you can stay here as long as you need, wedding or no." The words came out before he could stop them, contradicting years of self-imposed isolation. Julia turned to him, surprise evident in her features. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Preston considered his answer carefully. "Out here, we look after folks in trouble. That's all." But he knew that wasn't the complete truth. Something about Julia Anderson had already begun to chip away at the walls he'd built. The next morning, Preston found Julia in the kitchen, attempting to cook breakfast despite her obvious unfamiliarity with the wood stove. "Good morning," he said, startling her. "Sorry, didn't mean to frighten you." She offered a small smile. "I wanted to make myself useful. I'm afraid I'm not very accomplished at frontier cooking." Preston stepped beside her, showing her how to regulate the stove's heat. Their hands brushed, and this time, she didn't flinch away. "My mother taught me to cook," he explained. "Said a man who can't feed himself doesn't deserve to eat." Julia cracked eggs into a cast-iron skillet. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. The familiar ache of loss twisted in his chest. "Lost her and my pa 9 years back. Land dispute turned ugly." Julia's hand paused above the skillet. "I'm sorry." Preston shrugged, the practiced nonchalance of someone who'd learned to bury grief. "Frontier justice. It's why I keep to myself mostly. Attachments are dangerous out here." "Yet you advertised for a wife," Julia observed quietly. Preston met her gaze. "A man gets tired of his own company eventually, and a ranch needs children to pass it to." A shadow crossed Julia's face. "Is that all you want? Children?" The bluntness of her question caught him off guard. "I want." He hesitated, searching for words. "I want someone to build something with. Something that lasts." Julia nodded, turning back to the eggs. "I can understand that desire." They ate breakfast together, the silence gradually becoming comfortable. Afterward, Preston gave her a tour of the ranch, showing her the spring house where they kept milk and butter cool, the chicken coop, and the vegetative garden that needed tending. "I'm afraid it's all gone a bit wild," he admitted. "I'm better with cattle than carrots." Julia surveyed the overgrown plot. "I could help with this. I used to keep a small garden at my aunt's home." "You'd be welcome to it," Preston said. "Make any changes you like." As they walked back toward the house, Julia suddenly stopped. Preston, there's something I should tell you before we go any further with our arrangement. Preston's heart sank, preparing himself for some confession that would complicate matters. I didn't come west just for marriage, she said, her voice low. I came because I had to escape. The man I was engaged to in Boston, her voice faltered. He wasn't kind. When I tried to break our engagement, he became violent. My parents insisted I honor the commitment despite everything. They said a difficult husband was better than spinsterhood. Preston's jaw tightened. Those bruises. He did that to you. Julia nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I took money from my grandmother's inheritance and ran. If Richard finds me, she shuddered. He's not the type of man who forgives being humiliated. Preston gently turned her to face him. Julia, look at me. When she raised her eyes, he continued. No man has the right to hurt a woman, engagement or no. And nobody, not him, not your parents, will force you into anything while you're under my protection. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I needed you to know the truth. I appreciate your honesty. Preston hesitated. Does he know you came to Montana? I don't think so. I was careful, but uncertainty lingered in her voice. Preston nodded, though concern settled in his stomach. Well, Pine Creek's a small place. A stranger would stand out. What he didn't say was that the frontier attracted all types, including men running from their pasts. If this Richard was determined enough, even Montana might not be far enough. 3 days passed in a gentle rhythm. Julia began coaxing the garden back to life, while Preston tended to ranch business. Each evening, they shared meals and conversation, learning the contours of each other's lives. Preston found himself looking forward to these quiet moments, watching as Julia gradually relaxed in his presence. On the evening before the preacher's arrival, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Julia had baked an apple pie, the sweet scent drifting through the open door. Preacher Simmons will be here tomorrow, Preston said carefully. If you've changed your mind about the wedding, now would be the time to say so. Julia smoothed her skirts, a habit he'd noticed when she was gathering her thoughts. I haven't changed my mind. Unless you have? Preston looked at her profile gilded by the setting sun. No, he said softly. I haven't. Julia turned to him, something vulnerable in her expression. May I ask you something personal? Of course. You said attachments are dangerous out here, yet you're willing to marry a stranger. What? Preston considered the question, recognizing its importance. After my parents died, I convinced myself that caring for people was a weakness I couldn't afford. The territory is harsh, drought, blizzards, illness, outlaws. Loving someone means giving life a hostage. He paused, watching a hawk circle in the distance. But these past few years, I've realized there's a different kind of danger in living alone. A man can survive on his own, but he can't really live. Julia's hand found his on the porch railing, her touch light but deliberate. I understand that fear. After Richard, I told myself I'd never trust another man. Yet here I am. Their eyes met, and Preston felt something shift between them, a mutual recognition of shared wounds and cautious hope. The moment was broken by the distant sound of approaching horses. Preston stood, squinting into the gathering dusk. Were you expecting visitors? Julia asked. No. Preston's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. Stay here. 3 riders approached the ranch, their features obscured by the failing light. As they drew closer, Preston recognized the center rider as Sheriff Tanner from Pine Creek. Evening, Preston, the sheriff called, reining his horse to a stop. Hope we're not interrupting your supper. Evening, Sheriff. What brings you out this way? The sheriff dismounted, removing his hat. Got a gentleman in town asking after a young lady matching your guest's description. Says she's his fiancée who ran off with family valuables. Julia appeared beside Preston, her face drained of color. He's here, she whispered. Sheriff Tanner's eyes flicked to Julia. Miss Anderson, I presume? This man, Richard Hargrove, he's filed a formal complaint. Says you took jewelry belonging to his mother. Preston moved protectively closer to Julia. Sheriff, Miss Anderson came here as my mail-order bride. We're to be married tomorrow. Whatever dispute exists between her and this man is from a prior arrangement that was broken off. That may be so, the sheriff replied, but the law's the law. If property was taken. I took nothing that wasn't mine, Julia interrupted, her voice stronger than Preston had ever heard it. The pearls were my grandmother's, given to me on my 16th birthday. I have the documentation to prove it. The sheriff looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Mr. Hargrove is staying at the Pine Creek Hotel. Says he just wants to speak with you, miss. Clear things up. There's nothing to clear up, Preston said firmly. If he has a legal claim, he can present it through proper channels. Julia doesn't have to see him. The sheriff sighed. Preston, you know I respect you, but this man's been talking all over town. Says he'll bring charges of theft unless she meets with him. He glanced apologetically at Julia. Might be easier to just hear him out, miss. Preston felt Julia trembling beside him, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. I'll meet him, but in a public place, and only with Preston present. The sheriff nodded. That seems reasonable. Tomorrow at noon at the Pine Creek Hotel dining room. After the sheriff and his deputies departed, Julia collapsed onto the porch steps, her composure crumbling. He found me. I was a fool to think I could escape him. Preston knelt before her. Julia, look at me. He waited until her tear-filled eyes met his. You're not facing him alone. I'll be right there beside you. You don't understand. Richard is persuasive. People believe him. He'll tell them I'm unstable, that I imagined his cruelty. Then we'll be prepared. Preston took her hands in his. Do you have proof of your grandmother's gift? The documentation you mentioned? Julia nodded. In my trunk, along with letters from my friend who witnessed his violence. Good. We'll bring those tomorrow. Preston squeezed her hands gently. Julia, I made you a promise the day you arrived. I intend to keep it. That night, Preston lay awake long after the house grew quiet, listening for any unusual sounds. His mind raced with concerns about the confrontation ahead. Richard Hargrove had tracked Julia across the country. Men with that kind of determination rarely accepted defeat gracefully. For the first time in years, Preston felt the full weight of caring for someone else. It terrified him, and yet, he wouldn't have it any other way. Pine Creek bustled with Saturday activity as Preston drove the wagon into town, Julia sitting tensely beside him. They had decided to meet with Hargrove first, then, assuming all went well, proceed with the wedding when Preacher Simmons arrived on the afternoon stage. Remember, Preston said quietly as they approached the hotel, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're not alone anymore. Julia straightened her shoulders, clutching her small valise containing the documentation. I know. The Pine Creek Hotel's dining room was half full when they entered. Richard Hargrove sat at a corner table, rising as they approached. He was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit that stood out among the frontier attire of the other patrons. Handsome in a conventional way, with perfectly combed dark hair and a practiced smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Julia, he said, his cultured Boston accent carrying across the room. Thank goodness I found you. Your parents are beside themselves with worry. Julia's hand found Preston's arm, gripping it tightly. Richard, I left a letter explaining my decision. Hargrove's gaze shifted to Preston, evaluating him with obvious disdain. And you must be the rancher. He extended his hand. Richard Hargrove, I appreciate you looking after my fiancée during her episode. Preston shook the offered hand with deliberate firmness. Preston Xavier, Julia's fiancé. He emphasized the last word. Hargrove's smile tightened. There seems to be some confusion. Julia and I have been engaged for over a year. An engagement I broke before leaving Boston, Julia said, her voice surprisingly steady. Darling, you were distraught after your grandmother's passing. You weren't thinking clearly. Hargrove gestured to the chairs. Please, let's sit and discuss this civilly. Once seated, Hargrove leaned forward, lowering his voice. Julia, this has gone far enough. I've made arrangements for our return journey. We can put this unfortunate incident behind us. I'm not going anywhere with you, Julia replied. Our engagement is over. It has been since the night you struck me. Hargrove's expression darkened momentarily before he composed himself, aware of onlookers. Such imagination. This is precisely the sort of outlandish claim your parents warned me about. Julia opened her valise, removing several folded papers. I have proof of your violence. Letters from Charlotte Wilson detailing what she witnessed. And documentation proving the pearls were my grandmother's gift to me, not your mother's heirloom, as you claimed to the sheriff. For the first time, Hargrove's composure slipped. You little, careful, Preston interrupted, his voice deceptively calm. Choose your next words with extreme care, Mr. Hargrove. Hargrove's jaw worked as he regained control. Those letters prove nothing. Charlotte was always jealous of our relationship. Perhaps, Julia conceded, but will a judge believe they're all fabrications? Especially when combined with Dr. Miller's records of treating my injuries. Records I had sent to my aunt in Chicago before leaving, for safekeeping. Preston watched the calculation in Hargrove's eyes, admiring Julia's strategic thinking. She had planned her escape more carefully than he'd realized. "You're making a grave mistake," Hargrove said finally. "This primitive existence is beneath you. What would your father say, seeing his daughter reduced to a rancher's wife?" Julia's chin lifted. "He would say I finally showed sense, choosing a good man over a wealthy facade." She pushed the documents across the table. "Here are copies of everything proving my ownership of the pearls. The originals are in a secure location. I suggest you withdraw your complaint with the sheriff." Hargrove didn't touch the papers. "And if I don't, then we'll contest it formally," Preston said. "During which time, Julia and I will be legally married, giving me every right to protect my wife's interests. I don't think a prolonged legal battle in Montana territory would suit your reputation, Mr. Hargrove." The unspoken implication hung between them, that frontier justice sometimes operated outside formal legal channels. Hargrove stared at them, hatred barely concealed behind his polished exterior. Finally, he stood. "Keep the damn pearls. They're not worth the trouble." He buttoned his jacket with deliberate precision. "But mark my words, Julia, you've made an enemy today. One day, you'll regret this choice." As he turned to leave, Preston also rose. "Mr. Hargrove." He waited until the man faced him again. "Should anything happen to Julia or anyone on my ranch, anything at all, I will hold you personally responsible. And out here, we handle responsibility differently than in Boston." Hargrove's face paled slightly before he strode from the dining room. Julia released a shuddering breath once he was gone. "Do you think he'll leave? After making such a scene?" "His pride won't let him stay." Preston covered her trembling hands with his. "You were magnificent." A small smile touched her lips. "I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Preston said. "It's facing what scares you anyway." Their eyes held, something unspoken passing between them. The clock on the wall chimed noon, breaking the moment. "Preacher Simmons won't be here for another 3 hours," Preston said. Would you still like to go through with the wedding today?" Julia studied his face. "Do you?" "More than ever," he answered honestly. Her smile bloomed, transforming her face. "Then yes, I would." They were married in Pine Creek's small church with Walt Dunn and Mrs. Benson from the general store as witnesses. Julia wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, with wildflowers Preston had picked on the way to town. Preacher Simmons kept the ceremony brief, but his words about partnership and weathering life's storms together resonated in the sunlit church. When Preston slipped his mother's ring onto Julia's finger, the gold band worn smooth from years of his parents' marriage, something tight in his chest finally loosened. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Simmons declared. "You may kiss your bride." Preston hesitated, aware that he and Julia had never shared even the simplest physical affection. But Julia rose onto her tiptoes, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips that held both promise and question. They drove back to the ranch as the sun began its descent, the valley spreading before them in golden splendor. Preston could hardly believe that the woman beside him was now his wife. Julia Anderson, no, Julia Xavier, had shown more courage in one day than many showed in a lifetime. At the ranch, Walt and the Hands had prepared a small celebration. Lanterns hung from the porch, and a feast waited on tables set up in the yard. Someone had even brought a fiddle, and soon music filled the evening air. Later, as stars appeared overhead, Preston found Julia sitting alone on the porch steps, watching the celebrations. "May I join you, Mrs. Xavier?" he asked. She smiled up at him. "I'm still getting used to that name." He settled beside her. "Does it suit you?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Walt attempt to teach one of the younger Hands a complicated dance step, much to everyone's amusement. "Thank you," Julia said suddenly, "for standing beside me today, for keeping your promise." Preston turned to face her. "Julia, there's something I need to say. When you first arrived, I thought this would be a practical arrangement, companionship in exchange for security. But these past days," he searched for the right words, "I've begun to hope for more." Julia's eyes reflected the lantern light. What are you hoping for, Preston? A true partnership. A chance to build something real together. He took her hand. I'm not asking for feelings you don't have. I know trust comes slowly after what you've been through. But I want you to know that my promise to keep you safe includes keeping your heart safe too. Tears gathered in Julia's eyes. I came west believing I would never trust a man again. That the best I could hope for was security and respect. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. But you've shown me something I didn't expect to find. That kindness can exist without conditions. That strength can be gentle. Preston lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. We have time, Julia. All the time we need. She leaned against his shoulder. I think, perhaps, we might need less time than I feared. The seasons turned, summer fading to autumn's glory, then to winter's stark beauty. The ranch thrived under their combined care, Preston managing the cattle and land, Julia transforming the house into a true home and tending her now flourishing garden. Together they weathered blizzards and drought, market fluctuations, and the 1,000 natural challenges of frontier life. Word reached them in early spring that Richard Hargrove had died in a gambling dispute in San Francisco, closing that chapter of fear forever. By then, Julia's nightmares had largely subsided, replaced by dreams of their future. 1 year after their wedding day, Preston found Julia in the garden, her hands deep in the rich soil as she planted summer squash. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the valley. The north pastures fenced, he said, kneeling beside her. Walt thinks we'll be able to expand the herd by another 50 head this year. Julia smiled, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face with the back of her wrist. That's wonderful news. The extra income will help with the expansion. They had begun building an addition to the house, planning for the future with quiet confidence. Preston watched his wife work, still sometimes amazed by how completely she had taken to frontier life. The fear that had once haunted her eyes had been replaced by quiet strength and genuine happiness. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. A wedding anniversary gift. Julia sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her apron. Preston Xavier, we agreed no gifts. This one couldn't wait. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter from Dr. Sarah Jenkins in Pine Creek, confirming what they had begun to suspect. Julia was expecting their first child, due in late autumn. Julia's eyes filled with tears as she read. You already knew? Preston nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Dr. Jenkins told me yesterday when I went to town. I wanted to surprise you. Julia launched herself into his arms, heedless of her soil-covered hands and apron. Oh, Preston, a baby. He held her close, his face buried in her hair, overwhelmed by gratitude for everything that had brought them to this moment, even the pain and fear they had both endured. Are you happy? Julia asked, drawing back to search his face. Preston touched her cheek, his hand gentle against her skin. When you stepped off that train with fear in your eyes, I promised to keep you safe. I never imagined you would make me feel so safe in return. Julia leaned her forehead against his. We keep each other safe. As the Montana sun bathed them in golden light, Preston marveled at how wrong he had been about the frontier. It wasn't that love had no place here. It was that love was the only thing that made the harshness bearable, the isolation meaningful, the struggle worthwhile. I love you, Julia Xavier, he whispered, words that had once seemed dangerous now feeling like the surest truth he knew. Julia's smile outshone the sun. And I love you, Preston Xavier. From fear to forever. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. The mountains stood sentinel, and inside their home, a rocking cradle waited to be filled. All parts of a life built together, one day at a time, on the foundation of a promise kept.